It was interesting. I showed the trailer, to a director I'm working with, and he looked at the trailer and he said, "What's great about this is that this is a show I would watch, my wife would watch, and my daughter would watch." And we didn't set out necessarily with that intention, but it is dealing with a lot of universal stuff in a kind of entertaining way that I think is relatable at a lot of levels for a lot of different people.
Hi, guys. Is everything okay?
Good evening, sir. You live here?
Yeah, I sure do.
Your house was placed on the vacation watch starting tonight. Saw the Honda parked on the street, lights on in the house. Figured we'd check in.
That's my son's car. I told him to pull it into the garage before we left.
So you are going on vacation?
Oh, yeah, bright and early tomorrow morning. My wife must have given you the wrong date when she called it in.
No worries. Have a great trip.
Thanks, you guys. I appreciate it.
Welcome to Behind the Lens. Today, Jonathan Tropper has done two movies that he wrote that I raved about in my reviews, so it's public record. This Is Where I Leave You and Kodachrome, and so many other things. And now he's got this terrific new series on Apple, Your Friends and Neighbors, starring Jon Hamm and a fantastic cast. And I just can't wait to talk to you about this. Jonathan Tropper, welcome to Behind the Lens.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I am a fan.
Good. That'll make this go much better.
Yeah, I had many conversations about you when This Is Where I Leave You came out with Sean Levy, who directed it, and who I know. And I said, "Where did you get this? This so unique for these times to see a movie like that released by a major studio like Warner Brothers."
Yeah, that's the surprising part, is that we did it at Warner's.
Wasn't it that they let you do that?
Yeah. It took 5 years. I mean, they didn't just let us, but yeah, we got it done.
But that was such a good movie, and so it led me into Tropper land here in your career, which is pretty remarkable. I think it's 6 novels at this point.
6 novels, yeah.
Yeah, and many television series that I wouldn't have expected based on your novels or your some of your movies that you might have gotten involved with. Martial arts and different things, of course, Banshees and all kinds of things you've done. So you're all over the map here.
Yeah, I mean, when I came out to LA looking to transition from novel writing, I thought I was going to sell shows like my novels, which are much more like Your Friends and Neighbors, really.
Yeah.
And nobody was buying them. And I was also a huge fan of the action movies of the late 80s and 90s. And Banshee was an idea that I'd really had since high school. And when I kind of gave up trying to sell these kind of character-driven suburban ennui shows because nobody was buying them, I pitched Banshee and they bought it in the room, and that became sort of a 12-year odyssey of doing genre television and action television, which was never the intention, but I had a great time doing it.
Yeah, and then, of course, Bruce Lee developed or whatever was responsible for another one of your
the
series.
Warrior treatment. Well, I was finishing up Banshee, and someone introduced me to Justin Lin, who had this treatment from Shannon Lee, Bruce's daughter, and it just I saw right away that could be a really fascinating show.
It's so amazing. And you had a good time doing those kind of shows?
Yeah, it was a great time. First of all, like, this is my first show, Your Friends and Neighbors, that doesn't have a full-time stunt team. And and right now I'm enjoying not having that, but for a long time it was just great. You know, I'm such a huge action fan, and being able to actually craft that stuff and try to do it with better writing than that genre usually demands, and more character stuff, but also, really develop, sophisticated action sequences and martial arts sequences. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, now with Your Friends and Neighbors, you're back to the character development and all kinds of things like that with I know you deal a lot with, I think, interestingly, in this series, and I've seen it before, with the relationships between growing up adult siblings too.
Yeah.
Which you don't often see at all in these kind of movies.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I like doing books and television set in that world is you can really sort of explore relationships that never really get explored certainly in movies and TV, which are the sibling dynamics. I think male friendship is also something that, how do men express each other to each other,
Yeah.
which is something you don't see a lot. And then all the usual stuff of like, marriage, divorce, sex, death, love, all the suburban ennui that comes with being out there in the suburbs.
Yeah. Well, now in your novels, they're mostly set in upstate New York, very kind of well-to-do areas there. It's
Yeah.
suburban life that fascinates you, and that's where you grew up for a part of your life.
Yeah, well, I grew up actually in Riverdale, which is a little more urban. It's closer to Manhattan, but when I was in my early 30s, there was a 15-year period when I lived out in Westchester, and as a novelist living among all the finance people, I sort of got to sort of have a real insider outsider view of the whole thing.
So, how true to life is your friends and neighbors, having lived it yourself?
Well, it's not terribly true to life. I mean, it's an invented plot device, and it's certainly a heightened world.
Mhm.
But I think it comes from a deep familiarity um, with the people who live up there and the value systems up there and the aesthetic up there, and it's done with both a sense of skewering it, but also a sense of love and affection for it. And so I think it's not a hardcore satire because I want you to have sympathy for these characters, but at the same time, I think it's an exaggeration and it's a little bit of a farcical rendering of that world, but there's definitely some accuracy to it.
And did you write this for Jon Hamm?
Yeah, I had this idea for a long time, and as it started to crystallize, I felt like he was really the only actor I wanted to do it with. I didn't know him, but he just seemed like, really the guy who knows how to walk that line between comedy and drama and satire and farce, and who could sort of blend them all into a performance where you could sympathize with him even while he's doing, some bad things. And so I managed through my agency to get a lunch with him, and I pitched him the idea. And when I saw he was really keen on the idea, that's when I wrote the pilot. So I wrote it with him in mind.
That's unusual because a lot of times I talk to writers and they say, I have no idea with an actor in mind because they don't want to be disappointed that they can't get him after they write the script.
Yeah, I've generally worked that way in TV. I've always written TV shows without knowing who the lead would be or who the actors would be. In this case, I didn't want to go through the trouble of developing a whole show and then finding out that I couldn't cast it. So
Right.
this one felt really specific, and I said, let's at least start from the assumption that I've got the actor. And so it was interesting. It was a different process to write when I had Ham's voice in my head, and that's who I was picturing.
So he plays Coop, as they all call him Coop, except
Yeah.
his sister, who calls
Calls
him
him
Andy. His name's
Yeah.
Andrew. And what kind of character is he that you wanted to create there, with him? Because obviously, though he's done so much work, and we know him from so many other things now too,
Mhm.
Don Draper is in your head when you start to watch this.
Yeah, I mean we knew we would be carrying that weight with us, and so I think the idea was let's dispense with that pretty quickly. So when you meet him, not in the first shot of the series, but pretty early on in the series, you do see a fairly Don Draper looking guy.
Yeah.
But
In that world, high rise New York, even though it's
sure,
more contemporary.
yeah, and it was funny because when we shot the pilot, the minute we saw him sort of walking on, I think it was Third Avenue, getting out of a yellow cab in a suit, it just felt so iconic because that we've already seen.
Yeah.
But the idea was to do that and then deconstruct it really quickly. And so I think, by 20 minutes into the pilot, the Don Draper's gone, and you're dealing with somebody who's much more desperate, vulnerable, befuddled.
His whole life
Yeah,
is sort of falling
it's
apart
falling apart.
personally and now professionally.
Yeah, and what I think is so unique about his performance compared to some of his other performances is that he usually plays a very in command character. And the fun of this show is you see a glimpse of that at the beginning, but it
Yeah.
becomes very clear halfway through the pilot that this is a guy who's like losing his grasp on everything. And watching that humbled, vulnerable Jon Hamm is, I think, something people are going to really find a little bit of a revelation.
100%. My wife is so hooked on this show. Every night she said, "Did you get the last two episodes yet?" And to watch, which she's not always. She'll watch something for 5 minutes, say, "I don't like it," but this show totally has hooked her.
It was interesting. I showed the trailer to a director I'm working with, and he looked at the trailer and he said, "What's great about this is that this is a show I would watch, my wife would watch, and my daughter would watch." And we didn't set out necessarily with that intention, but it is dealing with a lot of universal stuff in a kind of entertaining way that I think is relatable at a lot of levels for a lot of different people.
And different characters like that run through it, the daughter, the kids, their life. You sort of cover the waterfront of a family here
Yeah.
in the midst of a personal crisis. They're divorced, they're apart now, but they're brought back together because they have kids, and so
Yeah.
they can't escape each other.
Well, you also can't escape each other when you choose to stay in the same community. You're part of the same social circle, and it always becomes a game of who gets custody of which friends. And in this case, they've really managed, at least outwardly, to maintain a certain level of friendliness that and cordiality that makes it okay for both of them to be at all the same social events. But that also makes it really hard to create the separation you need to move on with your life.
So you managed to lure Jon Hamm back into a series, television series, as opposed to a limited series. I didn't realize when I started watching this that it had already been picked up for season 2 before it's ever, hit the air.
Yeah, that was very exciting for us. It wasn't what I expected. I don't really know. I was never really privy to the reasoning behind it, other than the people at Apple TV Plus watched the pilot and got very excited. Then they watched a few more episodes, and I think the philosophy was, we're going to bet on this show, and if we're going to do that, let's keep it on as close to an annual cycle as possible, because that's the way to hold on to the fans and grow it. I think the real challenge in streaming now is often sometimes a 2.5 year wait for the next season.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is stay as close as we can to the old model of a whole new set of episodes every year.
So we're going to see season 2 next year? What?
Yeah. I can't say exactly when, but the goal is to keep it on close to an annual.
Have you started
cycle.
writing it? Are you?
Yeah, but we start shooting it 3 days after the show comes out. We start shooting season 2 April 14th.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. So
yeah, they got us started very early. I think they knew they were gonna.
Well, let's hope people watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I keep saying. Like, there's so much marketing and people are so bullish on the show that now the pressure to be successful is tremendous.
Yeah, but I think it will, and I don't know where you're going with it, as an ongoing series, but it's certainly interesting. There was a review of it I just read, and the first paragraph of the review said, "Oh my God, that's exactly what I was thinking when I'm watching the show." John Cheever's The Swimmer, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. I love it, with Burt Lancaster, where he basically swims in pools in a
Across the
suburban
whole neighborhood. Yeah.
through the whole neighborhood with all these different people. Did you have that in mind at all when
It's interesting when you can't really say what you've had in mind or not. I certainly grew up on Cheever and Updike and John Irving and Richard Russo and a lot of writers who write about, different versions of this world. So I had read The Swimmer many years ago, and I had seen the movie when I was probably not ready to understand the movie, and I never managed to go back and see it again, which I should.
Oh, you should. There's a beautiful DVD out on it too, with all kinds of extras.
Yeah, so I need to get back and see that again. But yeah, we've talked about a lot of those influences, and then more cinematic influences like American Beauty and The Ice Storm, and
Right.
But there's a whole, I don't even know if it's a subgenre or actually a genre of this sort of upper middle class suburban ennui world, and this is just a take on it that adds a certain level of very contemporary fun, and also, I think it speaks a little more to what's happened to us since the pandemic and with the political climate, is that we're all struggling with this new awareness of the impermanence of everything and how fragile the scaffolding of our lives is. Because I think before the pandemic, people who'd come of age before that felt there was a certain permanence to neighborhoods, to communities, to lifestyle, to income streams. And what's happened since the pandemic is we've realized there are a lot of external forces in the world that can, shut this all down pretty quickly. And that's a little bit, that fear is kind of what the show is about, that, it's not yours if you can't keep it.
This show is coming on at a time where that is really prevalent now. We're seeing it kind of
especially now, with the economy doing
a real kind of melding that makes this show come in and become very timely in its own way, which you can't predict
Yeah.
as a creator. You never know, right?
No, the same thing happened when I was doing Warrior, which was a show about, the Chinese immigrant experience in the 1870s. When we developed that show, Trump wasn't president, and this was the first time around. And then by the time the show came out, immigration was the hottest topic in politics, and that wasn't something we ever predicted. There's probably some, subliminal zeitgeist that we're not even aware of that generates this stuff at the right time.
Yeah.
But it's definitely never conscious.
The dialogue is so rich and extensive, you don't normally see it in series television at all. Maybe in streaming sometimes. But I don't know what your process is in writing it, but I guess it comes from being a novelist, and all those novels, very literate.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time on dialogue. And first of all, series television used to have this a lot. Like, I was raised on Aaron Sorkin, where it existed in every show he did.
Exactly.
And, I wanted to plant the flag very early in this series that this is a show that can do a 6-page dialogue scene if it merits it. Because, to me, those are set pieces, to the same way a fight is a set piece. And, these are very smart people. And doing a show where every person on the show is the smartest person in the room is just it's a challenge that we embrace, because I think it really keeps the viewers very engaged, because the conversation isn't just to advance plot, but the conversation is to express character and to also express worldview, and so we take a lot of time with the dialogue.
Yeah, and it's very apparent there too. And some of the dialogue's so great. But one line strikes me too as really showing what a lot of this is about. He's a thief. He becomes a thief, breaking into the neighbor's home, stealing
Yeah.
things he thinks they'll never miss because
Yeah.
they're so rich, watches and things, and all of that. But there's a line that says, "It's not yours if you can't keep it."
Right. That's
And
really the motto of the show.
that really is the show, isn't it?
Yes. That's the lesson he learns. Like, if you've grown up, Ham and I are roughly the same age, and this character is that age, and you've grown up the first 45 years of your life believing, follow these rules, go to these schools, work hard, and you will build something that you can keep. And, what we're learning in this world now is that's not necessarily true, but that's a hard lesson for somebody who's been that successful, because their assumption is, I have built something I can keep. And so we wanted to get that said in the pilot in a really firm way, that the lesson he learns day one of this show is, you were wrong, and it's not yours if you can't keep it.
Yeah, and on the opposite side of the scale, the things he's taking from people too, it ain't theirs either.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole premise of this show is the stealing, the robbing his neighbors is obviously the sexy elevator pitch.
Right.
But what he's really doing is he's realizing that there are no rules. And if the rules that he adhered to didn't help him, why should he adhere to them anymore? So it's a liberation for the character.
Right, in that way too, and the things he couldn't keep, his marriage and things, and he was playing around and all the things, and his family unit together, all of those things that are the American dream, supposedly.
Right.
But in this case, we see the American dream may not be what you think.
Well, it's just that so many of us have been raised to believe that the American dream is a promise, right? But it's not a promise, and no one has to keep it. And so he's figuring out that he's the last person who believed he couldn't keep it. And so watching the entitlement and the privilege clash with his new reality is, I think, what makes the character so compelling.
Yeah, that there's a loophole.
Yeah, and he's still, and even after it happens, something in him won't believe that he can't have it.
Right.
Because it's just, 50 years of a belief.
Yeah, amazing. Is John signed on to do this for, like he did Mad Men, for all those seasons and things? Is that
he knew it was an ongoing series, and
Yeah.
he made a deal for that. I don't know exactly how many years or how long we plan to go. I always start out knowing a really strong 3-season arc, but obviously in success, the idea is to open that up. And I think this is a world we can continue to introduce characters into. And I don't think it's a show that he'll be robbing his friends and neighbors every year for 3 years. I think that would get kind of dull.
That's what I wonder. I'm going like, Lieutenants, where do you go?
It's not a sustainable. It's not only not a sustainable premise, it's not a sustainable way to make your living.
Right.
So, but I think the notion is more he's not gonna follow the rules anymore. So whatever he has to do, to get back what's his, he's going to do. And I think it'll be interesting every season to see how he elevates that.
Yeah. So you have all these titles here, but creator, showrunner, director, writer, executive producer.
Yeah, well, some of those are the same thing, but
This is what Wikipedia has under your name.
Oh, that's nice.
Which is impressive.
Right, but I should say that Craig Gillespie directed the pilot.
I know he's first couple of so he's great. He's amazing.
No, I don't believe this show would be what it is if he hadn't come in and developed.
But it's a feature film director, and he's got the sensibility.
Yeah, and he's who I wanted because the script, walks this very fine line between drama, comedy, and satire. And if you look at this stuff he's done, he knows exactly how to shoot that, how to put drama and comedy into the same moment of a scene, forget the same scene. And I knew, even though I knew exactly how I wanted the show to feel, I didn't know how to create that visual language. And bringing him in really, crystallized to me what the show is. So when they call me the director, I directed the finale of season 1, but I'm not the director of this show. Like, Craig directed it. Greg Yutanis directed a bunch of episodes. Stephanie Lang did. I just directed the finale because I pulled rank as a showrunner.
You did. And well, does directing interest you as much as writing?
Yeah, I like directing. I direct all my shows because it's nice to cut out the middleman sometimes. So I enjoy using that muscle, and I enjoy doing it, but I think I'll always be a writer first.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about some of these films. I loved Kodachrome. I mentioned Kodachrome, a movie with that I saw at the Toronto Film Festival.
That's where we premiered.
With Jason Sudeikis, and Ed Harris plays his father who's dying of cancer, and they go on a kind of road trip to get the last roll of film, essentially Kodachrome, somewhere. But it was so human, and it was so great, and it got sold to Netflix, and there it lives in the larder, as Paul Schrader once described.
That at the time, that sort of broke my heart because we made a show about film.
I know, and
you honest, it was a movie about film, and it's about Kodachrome film, which is a projected film, like it's meant to be projected.
Yeah,
and we shot it on Kodak film. And then it got sold right away to a digital distribution, and that's just the reality of the marketplace.
I know, but I was lucky to see it in a theatrical setting, which is, it makes all
that
difference.
That week they put it out.
That week, I know. I really was like championing that. I said, somebody's got to buy this thing. I kept talking to people, and it's like,
it was. I learned a lot of lessons on that one, and I had written that originally for a studio, and it languished for about 7 years, and Sean Levy, who had directed This Is Where I Leave You, was a producer on it, and he finally used his clout with Fox to walk it out of Fox so we could make it independently. So we made it in the end for like under $4 million. And
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But when you talk to Sean, he talks about these projects. He loves them. They're his babies too. He believes in that as well as the guy who does Deadpool versus Wolverine and big movies.
No, I've done 3 movies with Sean, and we're working on a 4th now. And, there's really no limit to the genres and the kind of films that he can get excited about. And, he has the passion to really develop them all. And, I was lucky because we would not have gotten Kodachrome made if he didn't have the ability to tell Fox to let us have it.
Yeah, you did the one, it was Adam Project, with Ryan Reynolds as well, with Sean Levy, and that's sci-fi. And but I wonder, when you come into a project, that was a spec script or a script by somebody, and then they had 2 other writers at different points.
No, I think that group of 3 did it all together.
Oh.
It was a group of 3 who did it, like, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, and then it just died on the vine. And I got just a call out of the blue from David Yates, who wanted to develop it for Tom Cruise. So I kind of took the general premise they had developed throughout the script and wrote a new adventure based on the premise. And then Tom Cruise fell off it, and every year and a half to 2 years or so, it would come back to life, and I'd write a different version of it.
Oh wow!
Until ultimately, I saw that Skydance, who had it, were doing a movie with Ryan Reynolds, and I got them to let me do one more pass and kind of try to write it in his voice. And they brought it to Ryan, and I didn't even know at the time they brought it to him. He was doing a movie with Sean Levy. And so Sean was like, "Hey, I know Jonathan." And literally over a weekend, they jumped on that movie, and it became a greenlit movie. It's
amazing.
Yeah.
And This Is Where I Leave You, which Sean directed.
Yeah.
gave a great role to Jane Fonda. I was so happy to see her get that kind of a role at this point in her career.
You know, she insisted on auditioning for that role.
No way.
Yeah, Sean wanted to cast her, and she said, "I'm only going to come if you audition me."
Jane Fonda.
Yeah.
2-time Oscar winner.
Yeah.
Legend.
She just insisted he audition her.
Wow.
She wanted to know that he knew what he was getting. And yeah, she's fantastic.
How often do you see that with actors that don't have to do that?
I know. That was pretty interesting. Yeah.
What if you didn't give her the role?
I wasn't in charge, but you know, that would have, I guess that would have worked out. But
Right.
you know,
It's amazing. But yeah, you like got a really kind of impressive, here's my list of different things that you've done, but you started out as something else. You worked in the jewelry side of things.
Jewelry display. Yeah, it wasn't jewelry. It was actually the displays that like stores use. Yeah, it was a kind of an ancillary offshoot of a family business, and I wanted to write novels, and I needed a way to make a living while I was writing, and this was something that, you know, my family had this weird little business nobody knew what to do with, and they said, go try to do that, and you can write while you're doing it. And so that's why I did that.
Wow. So did you always want to write? Did you just know it? Or
I always wanted to write. I just didn't believe I could do it professionally. I didn't know what the avenue was to get there.
Wow. And 5 of your 6 novels were optioned in record time.
That was like, there was a weird trend where once my second novel got optioned and kind of a big deal, everyone would just line up for the manuscripts and option them, but really none of them got made.
Which is, well, you know what? I know writers that have never gotten anything made, but make a great living optioning.
That would depress me too much. So when we came to This Is Where I Leave You, which at the time had already been a bestseller, I just said, you know, it's not about the money. I just need to be attached as the screenwriter. And so I think we took a lot less money on the deal so that I could be the screenwriter. And that's the one we managed to make.
Was that the first screenplay that you had written?
No, I had written an adaptation of the old 1950s play Harvey. That I did that for Fox 2000. That was my first paid script. And then this was my second.
They never made this Harvey version. Well, you know what? When you take something that was so perfect the first time,
I think that was
Jimmy Stewart. That's such a great movie. Yeah. Actually won an Oscar for Josephine Hull.
Who played this? Vita.
Yeah. But it's just a wonderful movie that still works today. So when you're approaching a remake or something, and Hollywood's full of no ideas, so they just want to remake everything. But
well, it was my first paid gig, so I was happy to have it.
That was good,
and it put me in the business. So
yeah. Maybe that script can resurface.
People have tried; it's come back once or twice. I'm not sure it should.
Well, you know, I highly recommend your friends and neighbors. You will get hooked on this every week, or the way it's being rolled out on Apple. I think they'll do the first couple of them and then they do it weekly, which is the way I like to watch television. So you can have that water cooler talk and talk about it, and then you wait for the next one. It's like White Lotus right now. Everyone's talking about how does it end?
Right.
You know, when you get all the episodes at once, it's no fun.
No, the problem is also everyone's watching it at different times. So I don't think it becomes a cultural conversation. And that's what we missed when we switched to streaming. And I think most of the streamers have actually pulled it back to that weekly release so that it has a chance to become part of the conversation.
How do you like working with Apple on this?
Oh, it's been great. Like, this is my 3rd show with Apple. I did C with them, and then I have the show Lucky, which is shooting now. And what's great about Apple is they don't try to make 100 shows. And so every show is kind of a passion project for them, and they swing for the fences. And, you know, they're not always going to hit the home run, but they're always trying for something significant. And they don't entertain a lot of development that they don't plan to make. So, you know, once they set you on the course, you've got a good shot of getting your show made.
Oh, wow. That's terrific. Well, I know when this runs, people will be already into the show, waiting, just like I am right now, to see how it ends. And then they see how it goes on.
Yeah.
Just as interesting for me as watching.
Yeah, we made sure not to end it in a finalizing way, because even before we got picked up, we knew we wanted to do multiple seasons.
So you have a steady gig here.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Yeah. Jonathan Tropper. The show is Your Friends and Neighbors. It's on Apple TV+. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Pete. I appreciate it.